Good evening and welcome to the Herkimer Middle School Reopening Forum for Parents and Families. My name is Emily Popek. I'm a communications specialist with Herkimer Central School, and I'll be moderating this forum tonight. We want to thank you for joining us this evening. This is the second of 3 forums that we will be holding this week for parents, students, and families. Our first forum was held last night, and that was focused on the high school. This evening, we'll be talking about reopening at the middle school for grades 6 through 8. And tomorrow evening, we will have our third forum focused on the elementary school grades K through 5. Tonight's forum is being recorded, and we will be sharing information from tonight's forum on the district website in the days to come. We are putting together information from last night's forum as well, and we hope to have that out to you within the next few days. I know that for any of you who tuned in last night, we did have a few audio issues. I know some of what was said may have been hard to hear at times. So we're working to get that information out to you so that we can be sure that you have the information you need and that you don't miss anything that was said during that event. That being said, we will be going over some of that same information this evening. So if you tuned in last night, if there were parts of that presentation that you didn't catch, that you weren't able to hear, the first portion of tonight's presentation will be covering a lot of that same information. So we hope that you will be able to stay with us through this hour-long presentation. We will take your questions the second half of this presentation. But just to go over again that schedule for the next couple days, last night's program was focused on the high school. Tonight we'll be talking about the middle school. Tomorrow, elementary school, and all of these online events begin at 7 p.m. And those links you will find on the district website. If you're joining us tomorrow night, you'll find that information on our website tomorrow. So just a few guidelines as we go through tonight's event. You can see the link at the top of your screen where you can submit your questions. That link is also on the district website. If you click through the link for the middle school parent forum, you'll see a clickable link there that'll take you to a Google form that should be quick and easy to fill out. And we will be looking at those questions as they come in throughout this evening's event. We've already gotten 1 or 2, and we hope that you will keep those coming to us throughout this evening's event. We'll do our best to answer all the questions we receive tonight. If for some reason there's a question that's asked tonight that we're not able to address, we will do our best to get you that answer either on a personal basis, or we'll provide that information as we share out more information about reopening in the days and weeks to come. We do ask that you be courteous in your comments. This presentation is being recorded, and we will be working to make this available online after the fact for anyone who may have missed it. So we have several speakers here tonight. Superintendent Robert Miller, Middle School Principal Zachary Abbey, Athletics Director Christy Paraguay, our Board President Brian Crandall, Director of Student Programs Michelle Ploss, and myself as moderator. You may not hear everyone speaking during the presentation tonight, but we did want to let you know who is here so that if there are questions related, for example, to athletics or other issues, we have people here who can address those questions as they may come up. And again, that link for submitting your questions is at the top of your screen. So just to go over briefly the outline of tonight's presentation, Mr. Crandall is going to start off by talking a little bit about our reopening plan and the process that we went through in developing that plan. Mr. Miller is going to walk us through some of the state regulations that also guided that process. Mr. Abbey is going to speak in a little more detail about what the middle school structure and schedule is going to be like for our students this fall. And then we will turn to your questions and our answers. Again, if you have questions, if anyone's just joining us, if you have questions that you want to submit, you can see a link at the top of the screen that you can type into your browser window. There's also a clickable link. If you go to the district website, there's a link you can click through there to get to that quick and easy form where you can submit your questions. And we hope you'll keep those questions coming to us, and we will address them at the end of this presentation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Crandall, who is going to talk about the planning process that the district went through in developing our reopening plan.
Thank you, Emily. The planning process started with reopening committees. The reopening committees consisted of administrators, teachers, health professionals, and board members. We had several meetings about the way in which each school could open in the fall, health and safety of the students and staff, as well as the mode of education that each school would be able to provide. The school district provided a parent survey with questions about internet availability, transportation to school, and health and safety. The school district also provided a staff survey similar to the parent survey. We also had coordination with local agencies and officials. The school district has been coordinating its reopening plan with the Department of Health as well as Herkimer PD. And we used the state regulations. All considerations about Herkimer's reopening plan have used the state's 145-page reopening guideline documentation.
Thank you, Mr. Crandall. Thank you, Mr. Crandall. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for attending tonight's forum. I want to take a moment to thank all staff that served on the regional and building level reopening committees. We've been working together in this unprecedented time to make the best possible decisions for our schools, our staff, our community, and our students. Ultimately, we are driven by our mission to provide the best education possible in a manner which minimizes risks to staff and students and is as safe as reasonably possible. With that, let me take you through some of the changes that you'll see in our schools this fall. Face coverings will be required at all times on school grounds for staff and students except while being instructing, or eating. During such times, social distancing must be maintained. Face coverings must be worn on school buses. The district plans a grab-and-go lunch system, which will minimize the amount of eating in school. There are some medical exceptions for face coverings, which may be accessed if necessary by students and staff. Medical exceptions will be reviewed and approved by the school health director and come with some restrictions for what that student can do on school grounds. Social distancing will be required whenever possible, and when not possible, face coverings will be worn. Classrooms will be designed to keep students and staff socially distanced. Face coverings are not required when socially distanced for instruction, but students and staff are encouraged to wear face coverings even during periods of instruction when possible. Mask breaks should be worked into the day, and proper social distancing must be maintained during any mask break. Performance-based music, such as chorus and band, require 12 feet of social distance to instruct in person, and this cannot be accomplished with staff and space constraints in our schools. Physical education likewise requires 12 feet of social distance to instruct and cannot be accomplished in school in person. As such, band, chorus, and physical education will all be offered by remote instruction only until such time as social distancing guidelines are modified. All classrooms and entrances will be equipped with hand sanitizer. Staff and students will be trained in proper hygiene. The district has introduced new sanitation procedures and have purchased new disinfection equipment, as well as installed higher quality air filtration. Sanitation of high-touch surfaces will be more routine and thorough. All staff will complete a health screening and temperature check daily. Parents will affirm health screening questionnaires each day that they send their child to school, which includes a temperature check. The school will also perform temperature check on their child routinely at the start of the day. The district will have a system of isolating sick children from their peers and protocols for sick children and staff to return to school and work in conjunction with the school health director, the Department of Health, and the individual's medical providers. All COVID testing will be coordinated by the healthcare provider of the staff or student or DOH in consultation when necessary with the school medical director. Contact tracing is performed by the Department of Health. The school will cooperate with the Department of Health in contact tracing investigations involving cases of COVID-19 which might occur in our schools. This means keeping accurate attendance and visitor logs, keep classroom seating charts, schedules, and transportation information. The district seeks to minimize the number of contacts that each teacher and student has at school. As previously stated, All students that ride the bus must wear a mask with some limited medical exceptions. Students will sit one to a seat with an exception for members of the same household. The district will allow one pickup point in the morning and one drop-off point in the afternoon. There can be no changes to pickup or drop-off location without at least a week's notice of the change to the district. As we look at these regulations and these changes under COVID, they've caused some changes in the way that we've set up classrooms. Most classrooms will fit now between 9 and 14 students with proper social distancing. So each classroom will have about half the number of students it used to. Hence, we need about twice as many classrooms as in the past to have students in school every day. Buses, which could hold up to 66 elementary students in the past, may now hold between 22 and 28 mass students, depending on the number of students from the same household on each bus. We will encourage parents who bring their students to school. We will encourage parents who can to bring their children to school, although drop-offs and pickups will be drive-through only, as well as we will be discouraging pedestrian visitation to schools. We'll be reaching out to families, or we've reached out to families to ask if you will need bus transportation, and we'll be using those lists to create specific bus lists and routes shortly. Our staffing capacity is designed for classes of about 20 to 25, with class size reduced to 10 to 14. It also creates constraints on the number of classes or the number of times a student can be on campus. Another outcome of these considerations has been that we will move to a virtual pre-K family engagement program for the fall of 2020-21, as we cannot accommodate the regulations required for implementing an in-person pre-K program in 2021.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
No, I was waiting for. All right. So our guiding principles are to maximize in-person instruction opportunities for our youngest learners and for those needing the most support, and to support the academic and social, emotional, and physical well-being of all students and staff while following all state regulations. So we've used that and the SED guidelines in terms of developing these plans. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Abbey to talk in detail more about what middle school instruction will look like at Herkimer this year.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. So as Mr. Miller was mentioning, all of the New York State regulations, they have significantly impacted the way that we are looking to return to school. School will look very different from how it has in the past, but we feel as though every decision that we have made up to this point and will continue to make is the number one guiding factor is always the health and safety of both our students and our faculty members. So one of the first and most important things, obviously, is those health screenings, that Mr. Miller was mentioning, that are throughout the entire regulations and that you hear about pretty much everywhere at this point. So the first step to that will be parents will attest that before they send their children to school each day, that they're going to take their temperature and the other typical screening questions. But once students arrive, there will be a secondary temperature check. So when students get to school, the first thing that they'll be doing is going directly to their first period classroom. So at that first period classroom, a temperature will be taken by their teacher, and that will be kind of their pass into the class. If at any point that a temperature is above the benchmark, then that student will then be seen by the nurse, as the only person that can actually do an evaluation on those students is our nurse. But in addition to that, we've hired an additional LPN to address symptomatic students and separate from routine medical needs. So one of the most important things, and the biggest guiding factor within the New York State regulations, is social distancing. It's in every single subtopic throughout the entire 145-page document, and that has really shaped how we will be able to have in-person instruction. So the movement of our students will be minimized as much as humanly possible to reduce the risk of transmission. So once that happens, when you have to socially distance, that obviously reduces the capacity in the classroom and it reduces the capacity on the buses. And then within that, we have to be wearing masks at any point that we cannot guarantee social distancing. So at any time that a student is on school grounds and they have the potential to be within the 6 feet barrier of other people, or they're in a common area, the mask must be worn. So we've been talking with teachers and we've been encouraging them to build in different opportunities that they can make sure that everybody is aware we're all going to be 6 feet apart. We're all going to be seated, going to be working on this task for this set amount of time so that everyone will have those opportunities to take those masks off. So students in the middle school will be minimizing the interactions with peers outside of their cohort. They'll be assigned to a cohort, which will be approximately 10 to 12 students. And for students in grades 6 through 8, they'll stay with that cohort their entire school day. So they will arrive at school, go directly to their classroom. The first thing that will happen is to get into the classroom, they'll have their temperature taken. And then from there, they'll have the opportunity to sit down and be able to order breakfast if they need it. So there will not be any cafeteria or locker use this year. So when a student gets to that first period class, they'll have a way that they can order breakfast for the day. The breakfast will be delivered to the classroom. And obviously, that would be one of those opportunities where it's built in to take the masks off. So the teachers will structure that time into their lesson so there'll be an opportunity for students to eat that breakfast with their masks off during that time. And then lunch will be in a similar fashion. We'll be running a to-go program for our lunch, but that, once again, since there will be no cafeteria use, lunch will be able to be ordered first thing of the day, and it'll be delivered to the classroom at the end of the school day. So the student schedules are being finalized to the best of our ability by August 28th. We're working on them now, and we hope to be able to share them on or about August 31st. The first day of classes for students in grades 6 through 12 is September 8th. So we should be able to have those sent home to everybody about a week in advance of that. Now, at different grade levels, their day will is when you are working on your tasks in real time with the teacher, with the group. Asynchronous instruction is when you're working on your learning activities and it's not necessarily happening at the same time as your scheduled class. So that could be remote learning opportunities, whether they be at home or they be actually taking place during the school day. So 6th grade students will actually be in attendance 5 days a week. While in attendance, they will receive in-person instruction in ELA, math, social studies, and science. And they'll be getting those on alternate days. Special area classes and PE will be provided with remote instruction. So to make sure that we can accomplish this combination of synchronous and asynchronous instruction, students in grade 6 will be issued a Chromebook to take to and from school on a daily basis. So looking at what a 6th grader's day would look like in more detail, you'll see that it's divided into 2 groups, Group A and Group B. So Group A is essentially, they're not necessarily the groups. It's actually almost like a cycle day. So essentially, a student on A in this schedule would receive their ELA instruction first thing in the morning. After that, you see that it's a remote time. But what's different about grade 6 is that they're going to be here 5 days a week. So that remote time is actually going to be supervised remote instruction. And there will be a licensed teaching assistant in the room with that cohort of students, and they'll be able to assist the students in their remote learning tasks. So remote learning tasks will be in their core area classes that they didn't have in person on that day. So in this example here, on that A day, they wouldn't be seeing their math or science teacher. So they'll have remote tasks assigned through Google Classroom that they can work on while having that support in the classroom as opposed to having to do it at home. Additional remote learning activities will take place in their special area classes, and those will be divided up by quarters. So they'll only have one of these at a time for 10 weeks, and then they'll rotate to the next. So those include art, family and consumer science, health, and STEM class. Music and PE will also be remote and will take place during that time. The one disclaimer to that is that the physical activity that goes along with the remote tasks for PE will most likely be conducted outside of school. And then if there's a student who is enrolled in resource, they will receive that instruction during one of the remote times from their special education teacher. So students in grades 7 and 8, also working in a hybrid model, also a combination of synchronous and asynchronous instruction, will be in the building 2 to 3 days a week. The only group of students that will be here for 5 days a week in grades 7 through 8 are our 12-on-1 students. As Mr. Miller mentioned earlier, additional attention and additional time in-person instruction for those students that need it the most. So for grades 7 and 8, they'll receive their ELA, math, social studies, science, and for grade 8 only, their Spanish instruction in person. Similar to 6th graders, their special area classes in PV will be provided remote instruction. The difference being that for grades 7 and 8, their remote instruction, their activities will take place from home, working remotely. So in-person instruction for students in grades 7 and 8 will be on those 2 days rotation. It'll be a Monday, Thursday, or a Tuesday, Friday, with specialized or remedial instruction taking place on Wednesdays. All students will have mandatory remote instruction on Wednesdays. Just like students in grade 6, this year, students will be issued a Chromebook to take to and from school on a daily basis. So to give you a more detailed example of what a 7th grader schedule will look like, this is an example of a student who would attend in-person instruction on Mondays and Thursdays. So they would have their 4 core area classes in the 4 different blocks. And then you see on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday, they would be engaging in their remote instruction from home. And that remote instruction includes all of their core area classes plus their special area classes, similar to 6th grade with that quarterly rotation for art, STEM, family and consumer science, and our seminar course. And then also, they will also have the PE and music for remote instructions. To show you what it would look like for a student with an IEP who has resource in their schedule, this once again is someone who would be attending in-person classes on Monday and Thursday. And you see that resource for in-person is built in as an extension of that day. That will be some additional support in person with the special education teacher, in which they'll be working on their goals, and they'll also be able to receive some additional support in the classroom work that's happening throughout the rest of their day. And then it doesn't show on well, it does show on Tuesday. I take that back. I did put it in there. So you see that there would be a time in which on Tuesday, when they're receiving the remote instruction, they would still have a resource class. So that would be a time that they could check in with their special education teacher, still receive that additional support on their classwork and working on their goals. So this is where that Wednesday for that additional support would come in. So this student could be in attendance for part of the day, receive that in-person resource instruction on Wednesday, and then some additional academic support during that time that they're home. So Wednesday could serve as a combination of a smaller in-person instruction time with some remote instruction as well. Once again, going back to the idea that trying to maximize that in-person instruction for our students that need the most support. And then as we transition to what an 8th grade schedule would look like, this is an example of someone who would attend in person on Tuesdays and Fridays. And you see that at the 8th grade level, it's now split up into 5-hour chunks because of that addition of Spanish. So all of our 8th grade students take their foreign language for a high school credit, in which that culminates with the Checkpoint A exam. So once again, remote instruction happening on the 3 other days, in this case, Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday, for those special area classes and PE. And then at the middle school, similar to the high school, we hope to be able to continue some of our extracurricular activities. Now, given that these will most likely have to happen virtually, and it won't be the same offerings necessarily that we're typically able to give, but we still want to offer our students the ability to be a part of something more than just their classroom instruction. And athletics, as been said before, is currently on hold, and it's delayed till September 21st, at which point we hope to have more information on the potential to have school athletics this year. Go one more. So in the end, how we can succeed at this in-person instruction is to do everything that we can to make sure that health and safety of both our faculty and our students is our top priority. We believe wholeheartedly that in-person instruction is the number one important thing for our students, but that can't supersede the health and safety of our faculty and our students. So it is imperative that we all work together and that we take all of these precautions to make sure that we're able to continue our in-person instruction as much as we possibly can throughout this school year.
Thank you, Mr. Abbey. So that concludes our presentation for this evening. We're going to use the rest of the time we have here to take some questions from those of you who have tuned in. And if time permits, we'll also go over some of the topics that came up last night. Again, I know some people had a little trouble tuning into last night's forum, so we may touch on some of those topics if time permits. But first, I'm going to go over some of those questions that have been submitted so far. The first question, I think, would be for Mr. Miller. Someone had asked how the district will accommodate if, for example, there was someone who had a high-risk individual in their family, how the district would accommodate a request for distance learning. So I know you mentioned in your presentation that that's going to be kind of handled on a case-by-case basis. Is there anything we know now about what that might look like if someone was learning fully from home? And that may be something for Mr. Abbey to weigh in on as well.
Again, I think that it's difficult to talk to the specifics because a lot of it's going to be grade level dependent. So I think that I would always recommend that the parent contact their school, the principal, that child directly to talk to them. In general, we have to be ready to move from a hybrid model to fully remote for whole classes at any moment. So we do have a plan to move to a remote instruction for whole groups, as depending on what the needs of the child are and how those needs can be met. The program would probably be designed for that child specifically. So it's really difficult we can do a systematic approach for massive enrollment in remote learning, but for each individual child, we're going to really have to look at what do they need from us to help them meet their needs. So that's really why it's important for them to talk to their school principal, and then or the CSE director, or who's ever in charge of their program at the school, so that we can talk to them and figure out how we make it work for the child and the family.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Miller. We did have another question about remote learning that I'm going to direct to Mr. Abbey. It kind of dovetails with this last idea about what learning from home might look like. Someone had asked, on the remote days, would the teachers be, live streamed? Would it be synchronous in real time, similar to like a face-to-face interaction? Or would it be more of an asynchronous format? What can you say about that, Mr. Abbey? What do we know about that right now?
Yeah, so the remote days, it would actually be a combination of the two. There would be times in which students would kind of tune in, and that can be both in small and large group structures, to the teacher presenting some material, or the teacher going over a concept that they found that students seem to be struggling with. But then there will be other times in which they're assigned a task, and then them checking in with the teacher by submitting that work, and then the teacher can then go back to them at a later point and go over what they submitted to them. So it would definitely be a combination of the two, not necessarily just, one thing all of the time. It would be what's best for what they're learning about at that particular time and for the structure of that class.
And is that level of detail, is that something that's going to be communicated by the individual teacher to their students at the time that we begin the school year?
Yes, exactly. In talking with some of the middle school teachers at this point, they're looking to create some of that structure at grade level so that they can have some consistency, but there will always be that at teacher discretion based on the learning activity at the time, what format would be best for students to be accomplishing that work at home.
We've had a few more questions come in about remote learning, so I'm just going to try to touch on those now. I know we had some questions on some different topics that had already came in, but we're going to continue talking about remote learning for just a minute. Someone had asked for 6th grade, will art, health, and et cetera be done during the remote learning periods while they're in the school building, or would art and health be done after the student gets home? Can you go over that just a little bit more?
Sure. So the day for 6th graders is designed to try to minimize how much they have to do at home. There will be times that they may not finish a task that they could take at home, and there may be some tasks that are better done at home. And then obviously PE with the physical activity, and as Mr. Miller mentioned earlier, the additional regulations of needing to be 12 feet apart, most of those activities would take place at home. But the goal is to provide that support for that remote instruction here in-house to minimize for our youngest group of students here in the building, to minimize the amount that they're having to do independently at home.
Okay, great. A similar question here about 7th and 8th grades. Someone had asked on the 2 days that they're not in school and it's not a Wednesday, it says, are the kids required to log in? I think you addressed that a minute ago, that some of that, it's going to be kind of on a class by class basis to some extent. Their teacher will kind of direct them what those expectations are. Is that correct?
Yeah, it will be on a class to class basis, but there will be some format of logging in, checking in, completing a task, because there has to be that student teacher interaction on those days in which they are remote. So sometimes it will require a login to a Google Meet. Sometimes it will require a submission of work. Those things will be worked out and should be pretty obvious within each assignment. And that's something that we'll be going over with our teachers to make sure that those expectations are known.
Great, thank you. I'm going to keep asking you some questions, Mr. Abbey, because there are some more questions here about scheduling and cohorts. One person had asked, how will the cohort be set up? I think you touched on that briefly in your presentation. Can you say a little more about the factors that are going to go into forming those small cohorts of students?
Sure. The number one driving force of the cohorts, first of all, is special education students and making sure that we are meeting their needs to the best of our ability. And then from there, there's a variety of factors that play into who will be in which cohort. Some of them include whether they have siblings in the building and trying to get them on the same day. Now it's not a guaranteed thing that we could do for everybody, but it is one of our priorities to try to make sure that family members are attending on the same days. There will, outside of that, then there's still a significant amount of factors as far as additional classes, additional space, and so we're doing everything we can to try to take all of these things into account to set up our cohorts to the best of our ability.
One more question about that, which I think you touched on. The question was if parents can request specific days to help with their work schedules. If families have specific schedule needs, is that something that they can relate to the school? Can you say a little bit about that?
If anyone has any specific needs, they should just reach out directly to me. And then, of course, if they have students at the elementary school, they should reach out to Mrs. Vogt, and at the high school to Mrs. Masso. We'll do our best to try to work with families. So anytime that there's a legitimate, reason for one over the other as far as a cohort is concerned, please reach out to us, and we'll do our best to try to accommodate to the best of our abilities.
Dipping a little bit back into these schedules, someone had asked, you showed a sample schedule for a 7th grade student in resource. Would there be any distinct differences for an 8th grade resource student schedule, or would that be pretty similar to what you had showed?
For the most part, it would be pretty similar. The only big difference with an 8th grade student compared to a 7th grade student who has resource is that there's a small percentage of our students that are language exempt. And if that's the case, we would try to fit in their resource instruction at the time that the rest of their cohort would be taking their Spanish class. But otherwise, it would work out pretty similar to that 7th grade schedule.
Okay, some more scheduling questions. One of the questions was about how parents will find out on which days their student's going to be at school, whether it's that Monday, Thursday, or the Tuesday, Friday. You had mentioned in your presentation the dates that we're hoping to have those class schedules out to parents. That's when they would get that information. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And we hope to have that sent home in the last week of August, on or about August 31st. And there will be a letter sent with it explaining which days that their child will attend.
Okay. One more schedule question, and then there are a few other topics that have come up that I want to make sure we get to as well. You had showed some sample schedules kind of showing what the day looks like, but can you just touch back on what those start and end times for the school day are going to be? And this parent was asking specifically about 7th grade. I don't know how much variation there is at the grade level.
Our plan right now, which is still tentative, we're working with Bernie Bus as far as transportation, which has really been a guiding force for quite a few of our decisions. But the elementary school is planning to begin first, and then once all of those runs are complete, then they could go out and pick up students at the junior senior high and get them here. So our tentative plan right now is to run from 8:30 to 1:30. And that would be true for all students in grades 6 through 12. The only difference throughout the day is depending on the grade level, your class rotations or the teacher rotations wouldn't necessarily always be the same length of time. 6th and 7th grade students will be with the same teacher for roughly an hour and 15 minutes, and 8th grade would be with the same teacher for roughly an hour because of that additional Spanish class for the in-person instruction.
And does that align with the start and end times for the high school day? Is there any variation there?
No, that is the same time frame. So grades 6 through 12 all will tentatively begin at 8:30 and end at 1:30.
Great, thank you. Onto a different topic, one of the questions we had gotten was about students entering and exiting the school building. They wanted to know if we're utilizing more than one entrance and exit for students coming into and exiting the building.
And that's something that we're still ironing out, but as of right now, our plan is to utilize more than one entry and dismissal point. Busing, right now, our plan would be to use the second circle. And then from there, we would split into 2 entry points, grades 6 and 7 going in one door and grades 8 through 12 going in the other. And the rationale for that is the location of the classrooms and trying to minimize any type of congestion in the hallways. So 6th and 7th graders would be able to enter a door that would be right near a stairwell, that they could go directly up the stairwell and straight to their classrooms. So in theory, not coming in contact with any other grade levels from there on out. And then we would use the front entrance, obviously for anyone who got here after 8:30 and for any students that actually drive themselves.
All right, we had a couple of questions about the health screening that we're asking parents to do at home, which I think Mr. Miller might be able to address. One person had just asked, how does the home health screening work? What exactly does the parent have to do? And how would those results be submitted or provided to the school?
essentially at this point, we are working on a sign off at the beginning of the year, an attestation that if you send your child to school or you send them to the bus stop, that you are affirming to us that they don't have any of the symptoms of COVID-19, and we list the symptoms on the sign off form, that they don't have a fever, that they haven't traveled to any of the states that are, or any places that are you're not allowed to travel to in the last 14 days, and that they haven't been around anyone that has symptoms or has been diagnosed with COVID in the last 14 days. So essentially, you're really the only mechanical thing that we expect you to do is to attest that they don't have a fever and that they're feeling all right. One of the caveats that we really have discovered in terms of working with this in a school is it really means that everyone in the family has to be well in order for any child to go to school. Because if any of your children are sick or are exhibiting symptoms, then all the rest of the children in the family have been around someone with signs or symptoms of COVID-19. So that's kind of new. Really, it is going to be something that our healthcare providers are going to work with you on, that if you have new symptoms in the morning, then your children can't come. If your child has new symptoms in the morning of COVID-19, then none of the children in that family or in that household can go to school. So mechanically, it's really just taking a temperature check and making sure that you feel well, you don't have nausea or any of the vomiting or any of the typical signs of sickness, and that you're well.
And I believe we're going to be able to provide that information to parents directly. We're not expecting them to remember all the stuff from hearing it tonight.
No, in fact, yeah, that'll be clearly spelled out in the attestation, and we'll make sure that there's a copy of that. But essentially, when you wake up in the morning, if you're not feeling well, you can't come to school anymore. You can't come to work. And if someone in the family isn't feeling well, then no one in the family can go to work or come to school until such time as. So if the child is sick, then you're going to work with your healthcare provider and our nurse to figure out why the child's sick. And then you might be able to go and get a negative COVID test. You might be able to go and get a diagnosis of strep throat or something that says that the symptoms are caused by something else. Or you might know that you have some type of routine illness that always occurs at this point. And this is things that we'll work with your healthcare provider and the school nurse. We'll probably work through that without getting involvement with administration. But essentially, it's simple. The simple answer is you have to be 100% well when you come to school now. You can't have a little sniffle. You can't have a cough. You can't have a sore throat unless those things are diagnosed by your healthcare provider to be something other than COVID in some way. Because we're going to assume all those symptoms are COVID until you prove otherwise.
So as sort of a follow-up question, you had mentioned fever, obviously, as one of the symptoms that we would be looking out for. Is there a specific benchmark temperature that is set for that? And again, that's going to be in the information that we're going to provide to parents.
Correct.
All right. Moving on to, I'm actually going to return to the topic of virtual learning because there was another question that came in about that. So the question was kind of about what the virtual learning is going to look like. They're asking specifically about 8th grade, wanting to know how this might be different from what was done in the spring, to what extent that 8th grade student is going to be spending time like on a Zoom or something similar with their teacher. So can you just revisit that once more for us, Mr. Abbey, and speak a little bit about what might be different from what students and parents experienced for remote learning in the spring?
Sure. In the spring, it was a sudden closure that led to us exploring a whole new way of learning and a whole new way of teaching. So I think that we have much more experience in what types of lessons work better for students while they're working remotely. So that alone right there, just having some experience with it, I think is putting us significantly further ahead than we were last March. Other things is the accountability factor that will go along with remote learning that some people felt wasn't necessarily there in the spring. And the other thing is that in-person contact within a couple days from the remote learning test that we currently are planning to open with that we did not have in the spring, which, in my opinion, for our students that struggle or have more difficulty working independently, it's extremely difficult to not have that contact with that teacher face to face. So in this hybrid model, yes, there will still be remote learning, but the fact that you go back and work with that teacher in person, I think will automatically improve what's going on in that remote instruction and will help with that accountability factor. The other thing that we are exploring, and the question addressed is, they felt that their child really struggled with that remote learning, is trying to create these opportunities for kids who are having a difficult time with the remote learning, and trying to find opportunities to get them some potential additional face-to-face instruction or support. Kind of on that Wednesday is one of those potentials that we're going to try to work on as the year progresses, and as we find out who is being successful and who's not being successful in those remote activities. And then even the potential for some after that 1:30, some additional support from teachers. But one of the big differences with this year as opposed to last year is the idea of students being around the building, and how that has to look and how that has to happen. And you can't just pop in at the end of the day, ask your teacher a couple questions, and then walk out front and sit with your friends. And that's something, that our kids love to do. They love the social aspect of school, but unfortunately, under our current regulations, and to make sure that we're able to continue with in-person instruction, like those types of things can't happen. So we're looking to work in the additional support while still having the structure of knowing where our students are, making sure that they are socially distant, and making sure that when that is complete, that they have transportation home at that point.
Great, thank you. Changing gears a little bit, there was a question here about sixth grade orientation. Will there be an in-person orientation? Can you speak a little bit, Mr. Abbey, to what we know about how we're going to welcome our new sixth graders into the building?
Yeah, so we've been having those discussions about the potential of having a sixth grade orientation. Typically that happens in the spring, which obviously wasn't able to happen. And then in previous years, when it was only seventh grade coming up, we would do an orientation in the summer. And that is obviously, the planning for that has been on hold, trying to see if we were even going to be able to open for in-person instruction. So discussions are happening. I can't guarantee that those will happen, but so that person knows that that is something that we are trying to make happen. And we are at the same time simultaneously working on virtual options in case we're not able to make that happen for the in-person.
Great. We are coming close to the end of our time. I have a few more questions I want to try to get through. We did have a question about school supplies, a couple specifics that they were curious about: binders, earbuds, and then also wanting to know if students can have their cell phones with them while they're in class at the middle school level.
So school supplies this year, what I would recommend to parents at this point is to be very minimalistic in your mindset of that. Without lockers, with the idea that students will be remote at most grade levels on a somewhat of an alternate day basis, we're asking that the supplies be minimized so that students are not having to have so many binders and papers and other supplies with them. Without that locker, they will be allowed to bring their backpack to their classroom with them, but we don't want them to be bringing too much stuff with them. So we've been talking with teachers about what are the essential items, and a lot of the teachers are really trying to go not 100%, but trying to go significantly more paperless. So what I would recommend for people right now is to only go with the basic supplies. Make sure that they have some writing utensils. Make sure that they have a couple notebooks and a couple folders. But other than that, I wouldn't go beyond that. The earbuds is definitely something that we would recommend. Preference being, something that fits over the ears as far as a cleanliness situation. But yes, we would like students to have headphones, and we have additional headphones that we can provide. But ideally, we would like to keep those for when a student forgets, and make sure that we're able to provide them with those resources, because there will be significantly more lessons and activities that are going to be done digitally. So anytime that a video is involved and sound is involved, if you have multiple students in the same room doing that, we're going to want kids to have headphones. So that is definitely something that they should. And in regards to the cell phones, cell phone rules, as far as the code of conduct, is that students are not permitted to use cell phones unless it's for academic purposes. So without having a locker, obviously that's not an option. So if they have it on them, they just shouldn't be utilizing it during instructional time.
Got it. Just to go briefly back to the topic of school supplies, should parents be looking or waiting for any type of more specific school supply list that of what kids should specifically have on that first day back to school? Or is this going to be a little more fluid and, just the basics? Can you say any more about that?
What they will get in when I send a letter is I will send basically what I just said, the very bare bones essentials. And I think how you said it is fluid, I think is the best way to put it. Right now, I think the worst thing that we could do is encourage people to go out and buy a whole bunch of school supplies that come in and we find that we're doing even more remote learning tests than we ever anticipated, and they go unused. So we don't want to put that on parents. No one will be punished. No one will be in trouble if they show up day one and don't have what they're expecting. And those are conversations that I will have with teachers, and we'll make sure, and I will find out from everyone if there are absolutely essential items, but I would anticipate that it would be much less than in a typical school year.
Great. And yeah, as you said, parents can look for a little more information coming about that, but they don't have to rush out and load up on school supplies right now. A few more questions in the time we have left. I think this would probably be a question for Mr. Miller because this is regarding transportation. There's a question about if their child can take the bus if they live on the line of 1 mile from the school. Can you say a little bit about that, about those transportation guidelines of which students will be transported?
The guidelines are, I think the regs are 1.5 or 2 for transportation. We do transport people under that distance in this district. Where the lines are in terms of the distance, has depended a little bit on which side of Route 5 you live on, because we transport some people less than a mile that are on the other side of Route 5 because we don't want students crossing Route 5. So I would direct you to contact either your building principal or the bus garage to talk about whether that's a spot where we pick up or not. And we wouldn't be picking up more students this year than we have in the past. So if it wasn't a traditional spot, then in the past it wouldn't be a new spot. But if it was a spot that we've picked people up in the past, then we could. But without knowing more details, I can't really answer that question. If the person wants to call the office, even my office, I'll get an answer for them.
Great, thank you. We had a couple more questions that I think relate to health screenings. I know, Mr. Miller, you had mentioned that one thing that's different this year is if someone is having some of, what we might have thought of pre-COVID as some pretty ordinary symptoms, then, our expectation would be that someone who is unwell is going to stay home. So there were two questions relating to that. One was about what opportunities there are for students to keep up with their schoolwork if they are home because of illness. So that may be something for Mr. Abbey to weigh in on too. So let's say a student, is ill, they have some symptoms that could be COVID related, they're going to be home for a period of time. Do we know anything about what the learning for that student might look like during that period that they're not coming into the school building?
So one of the main things that I've had discussions with through all of last spring leading into this year in preparation is that teachers do their best to design every learning activity so that it could be given both in person and remotely. So for example, when a child is out sick, so that if they're well enough, that is, of course, that they're able to still engage in that education while at home during that time.
Great, thank you. And then the last question that I think is kind of related to that is whether this requirement for health screening, the idea that potentially more students are going to be home due to, these symptoms, does that change the attendance policy in any way, or what are the attendance expectations related to that?
So we're not going to adjust our attendance policy for this, but if students are engaged in remote learning because they are on remote instruction because either they have COVID-related symptoms or someone in their family does, then those days would be attendance days in all likelihood, as long as they're performing the tasks and entering into the remote learning as directed by their teacher. That might include, and again, it's going to be grade specific, but at the elementary, perhaps a first grader does either an asynchronous activity with their teacher or Zooms into the classroom for 30 minutes and then has some activities that they got to complete. So that the attendance and those periods would be done differently, but it wouldn't be viewed punitively. We would be just looking to engage with that family and that child in a way to keep the children on task and trying to make their education as best as possible in those circumstances. But I would again look to Mr. Abbey if he has anything to add to that.
Yeah, and I agree with the idea that if a child has to be out because they're not feeling well or they're experiencing symptoms or someone in their home is experiencing symptoms, as long as they're engaging in conversations with their teachers and engaging in the work that's being assigned, we wouldn't necessarily be like progressing with, the steps that are included in our attendance policy. So that is the key distinction there. Now, if a student is just absent and not taking part, then obviously, that's a totally different story. But as long as they are keeping that open line of communication with the teachers, with the school, still engaging in the learning activities, those are things that I would not see as being an issue.
Great, thank you. We did have one last question come in as we're coming to the end of our time here. If a student had a Chromebook that they had borrowed in the spring, they still have it with them, should they bring that Chromebook back to school on the first day of school?
Yes, and I'm very glad to hear that question, because that was something that I planned on mentioning and hadn't yet. So obviously, for all of our students, and this is 6 through 12, if you had a Chromebook already assigned to you, or if you came in when we had to go to remote learning and you borrowed one, yes, please bring that back with you day one. You will be using it from the get-go. You will have a Chromebook assigned to you. That's all students grades 6 through 12, that they will have their own personal device for the year. And don't forget the charger, because that's another important thing. In a 5-hour school day, there's they charge it. And, as far as good practice is concerned, as the year progresses, every time a student goes home with that Chromebook, make sure that that's one of those nightly activities that you plug it in and make sure that's charged for the morning. Yeah, I guess that's it.
Great. I know I said that was the last question, but I had one more come in. And since we have just a minute left, I think this would be a question for Mr. Miller. Just to clarify, I know you touched on this, Mr. Miller, in your presentation, that our expectation is that students will attend in-person learning unless there's some medical vulnerability in the family that would prevent them from doing so. So just to clarify or revisit that, the question was whether a parent would have the option to go 100% remote for any reason other than a medical one. Can you just revisit that for us before we wrap up?
It would be difficult for me to answer that question in general. I mean, medical could be medical for that person, medical for someone in the family. So there could be some other underlying reason. We aren't offering it simply as a choice to all families to move to remote, but I would encourage whoever is asking that question, or if there's others besides this person who asked that question, to talk to their building principal or to the director of student programs, Ms. Ploss, and find out what we have to offer, what the concerns are, and we'll enter into a dialogue to figure out whether we can address those concerns and find a program or programmatic way to deliver instruction to your children that works for you. I'm not saying that we can always do that, but we're always going to be open to a dialogue to figure out what's best for your child in this environment.
Great, thank you. So we're at the 8 o'clock mark now. And that was the last question that had come into us. So I think we are going to wrap up for the evening. I want to thank everyone for tuning in tonight and for joining us tonight and for sharing your questions with us. Again, we will try to share all of this back out to the middle school community. We know not everyone was able to join us tonight, or you may have only caught part of this presentation. So we will put together these questions that were asked, the information from Mr. Abbey's presentation. We'll be sharing that information out on the district website. I want to make sure everyone understands this is not your only chance to get this information. You don't have to memorize everything we told you tonight. We're going to do everything we can to make sure that the things we talked about tonight are really clear to families before we invite our kids back to school on September 8th. So again, thanks to everyone for participating in this evening's forum. We appreciate your participation and your input, and we wish you all a pleasant evening and a good night.